Those sunny icons. Now north, temperatures climbing even further into the 30s.
In the future, certainly for companies like JT Johnson's and Son and Mantina, our biggest employers. I think the work that they've done in the manner in which they've gone about it too is so important. And this is being done in-house, pretty much. Local contractors with our own staff managing the project. And that's project of this scale, 3.8 million, is probably pretty unheard of in local government. So it's an absolute credit to Richard and his team, and I would like to make sure I acknowledge that. We move on now to our deputations and presentations tonight. And the first presentation that we have is the Roseworthy Township expansion and a progress update. And to present this, I would introduce Simon Sheriff. Simon, everyone's familiar with Simon. Simon doesn't take any introduction at all. And I'll move over to you. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Mayor Bill. Stacey wouldn't mind firing up that presentation. Thank you very much. So tonight, councillors, we're just providing in this first presentation a general update on the Roseworthy Township expansion. The last time we did this, I think it was about 12 months ago. So the time period for this update is about 12 to 18 months. This is a very similar presentation that was delivered to all the Roseworthy Township expansion landholders in early July. It's been tidied up a bit and tweaked a little bit to update in the last couple of months' activity. But so if you're talking to any of those landholders, they've had the similar sort of information in this presentation. So I will try to make this work. Is it going to work for me? No, Stacey, can you maybe hit the down arrow, please? Sorry, maybe it's out of range. So the first slide is just to give you an idea where the ground will cover. The first couple of items, Lisa Sapio, our Manager Development Services, is going to cover, and then I'll come back at governance and continue on from there. So, oh, did that work for me? Brilliant, it is working again. So Lisa will deliver the next couple from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. All right, as you can see, put together a bit of a timeline here as to the journey. So this journey, there'll be a few members in this chamber tonight that have been here for that whole journey. And we started back in 2010, where we actually instigated, as part of the 30-year plan, a growth area for Roseworthy. A little bit different to what's on the ground now, a substantially larger area, which is going to be the Roseworthy Garden Town Centre. But in 2010 and 2011, the Roseworthy Garden Town concept was developed by the Roseworthy Alliance. And then in January 2012, we had the endorsed concept provided to the state government, and the rezoning process commenced officially by the council. In 2012, in February 2012, the state government actually proposed a significant rezoning by the then minister, where we had a significant resizing downwards of what was originally proposed. In November 2012, the Roseworthy Town expansion area was approved, deeds and entered into with the various landholders. And then in December 2018, the first two land divisions were literally lodged within a number of weeks of the rezoning going ahead. Sorry, Stacey. There we go. Hang on, nearly there. All right, so the applications that we've had submitted to date, we've got St Ives, which is to the top of the screen there, which is we know we've had a number of presentations by Joe Pediciano at this council in the past. We've already had 77 residential allotments approved, and construction is well underway, and is totally almost sold out up to stage 3. We've also approved the estate entrance. We've got some photos coming up in a moment. The master plan for another 444 allotments has also been lodged. That's roughly for another 50 hectares, and of that, 13 super lots are in there. So the 444 lots that are proposed is not going to be the end result, because of those 13 super lots, we're going to see further subdivision in the future. We've got stormwater management. That's been a bit of a topical issue for St Ives over the last, since winter began. You will see that we'll come to that and we'll discuss that in greater depth as we get into the presentation. We've also got more applications which relates to the master plan and potentially other developments through the actual super lots in the coming months and possibly into next year. The St Ives group have also lodged stage 1 of the actual centre, the activity centre, and that's primarily for their a small cafe and for their medical centre, and that's for a 2-storey development. We've got the Quindu group just to the south of St Eves there, and they've already got 371 lots approved. They came in for their master plan as part of the one development, and they've already got approval for that, and they've started marking down, and they've also got detailed design plans approved by council. We've got the Daking Land Division, which is to the left of the screen, and that's got 191 allotments also approved, and that was approved by the panel in June of this year. The Marker Land Division is at the very top of the page to the north of St Eves, and that was the land division that took quite a while to get through. It was one of the first that was ever submitted, but that was the one that was affected by the roundabout. So there was a whole process to go through because that particular application proposed a road treatment that was different to the deed. So we had to go through a whole heap of governance in order to get that sorted in order to allow the land division to go ahead. So that Marker Land Division was only just approved by CAP just recently, and that was the first 49 allotments of what we expect to be about 270 to 280 allotments in there alone. So this is part of the work. So you've already, if you had a chance to go into the site, this is St Eves. So this is the actual bitumen, lighting, stormwater infrastructure that's been done. And this was the very first stage that was approved adjacent to Horrocks Highway. So that first street that you see there on the screen is called the Avenue, and largely that whole block is going to be dedicated to show homes. So we're going to have a number of show homes as part of the St Eves development. This is the approved entry statement into St Eves. So this is where you actually see that road junction right now off the Horrocks Highway. This is the beautification works just at the entry. So they've got a series of polished concrete walls that are going to be going in very soon, and they've already started some of the landscaping. So you'll start to see this, I suspect, in the coming months. We had a bit of a celebration just within the Development Services Department on the 6th of May because it's a long time coming, but the very first slab was actually poured. So as part of that, we've now got actually 7 dwellings underway within that particular estate. And we've got 36 dwellings already approved to date. This is a render of what the town centre may look like. It's not going to be overly different. This is actually showing the area that's going to be between Trinity College and actually the actual town centre. So that's going to be High Street, and it's going to have quite an appearance to it. We see the large trees. You're going to have large wide verges, and that's all intentional in order to create quite an impressive atmosphere. All right, this is the Quindoo Land Division that we were just discussing. So this is what the layout is looking like. We've got a couple of access roads onto Kangaroo Flat Road, 2 in particular, and then another 2 onto Twarts Road. No access directly off the Horrocks Highway. So the Quindoo development is actually required to do significant upgrades to the Horrocks Highway and along Twarts Road. Kangaroo Flat Road has been earmarked as part of the concept as the northeast freight route in the future. So that particular road, we're having to navigate some real challenges at the moment with the native vegetation that's there. So we're trying to see how we can maintain as much of that native vegetation as well as actually create a 20-metre road verge there for the future freight route. This is the Daking Land Division. This is closest to the rail corridor. This is the 191 allotments. We don't expect construction to actually start here for quite a while. This is also owned by the Hickenbotham Group, and we expect this to be sort of the last of the land divisions that they'll take off. They've indicated to us that the Marker Land Division and the Quindoo Land Division, they will start simultaneously because obviously they'll have all their construction crew on site, so they'll actually run them together. So we'll see quite a bit of development down the Horrocks Highway occur at once. So that's the Marker Land Division where we've got the roundabout. That's the one closest to the Roseworthy Road and Gartrell and the existing township. So that just sort of spatially shows the various land divisions that we've got in train. And that just shows it from what we call the SAPA website that actually maps all the land divisions that have been lodged to date. Just as a bit of an aside, the Marker land division, that's a 41 hectare site. The St Eves development, that's a 53 hectare site. The Quindu land division, that's just over 61 hectares. And then we've got the Shane land division, which is just underneath the wording where we've got Quindu and Hickenbotham, that's another 11 hectares. We've got 23 hectares as part of the Daking development. And then that area where you can just see the wording that says Daking and Hickenbotham, that's actually part of the Vergara land. That Vergara land, they've actually entered into a contract to sell that land in portions to a group called Villawood. And Villawood has since lodged the very first land division application with us, which is to create a 10 or 11 hectare super lot so that they will buy the land incrementally off of Villawood. So we'll also be starting to see some work happening. You may have already noticed the artwork that they've put there, advertising that they've purchased it. That's their site. So just as a comparison, Freeling, just the residential component only, that's about 213 hectares. So you actually look at what we've created here just with the residential component only of the Roseworthy Town expansion is 317 hectares. So it's approximately going to be 1.5 times the size of Freeling, just to give you a bit of an idea of what's going to be happening on the ground. Yes. A super lot is, so with the St Eves, for example, they didn't come in and give me a master plan that I could approve just off the cuff as one. They've come in and created a number of large allotments, and then they've come back and then further subdivided later. So they create one large allotment so they can have an interest in the land, and then they will come in and actually create the smaller land division later. So that's one way of being able to purchase the land from Villawood and sort of develop it in achievable chunks, so to speak. Sorry, this is going a bit, sorry about this. Okay, this is a report that's been made available by the state government, and we came across it when the Environment Food Protection area was under review. So that's already been 5 years since that's been introduced. So this land supply report was actually created, and this report actually shows that they, from the outset, and envisaged anywhere between 1,500 and 3,149 allotments. So to date, with the applications that have been lodged with the council, we've already got 1,079 allotments that are proposed as part of that broader Roseworthy Town expansion area. So we're already largely assessed 35% of the expected allotment yield for that whole area. I definitely didn't expect the take up and the land divisions to be lodged as quickly as they were. So it's been quite a surprise, but I think it's what's even more of a surprise is that we've heard things like from the Quindu group that they've already got 3 stages ready. They want to start on the ground and pretty much sold out of all 3 stages. So we've actually got quite a substantial demand. So we're not going to have land here that's going to be sitting idle. We're going to be seeing roofs going up very, very quickly. So that's largely, I think, I can really add from a development perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. Just moving on to governance within council, so the task force, which I chair. 2020 was a big test for us. It's the first time we started implementing the 3 infrastructure deeds for Roseworthy. So we learned a lot. And layered over the top of that was a pandemic and all the economic stimulus that came with it. And that put some real heat on, as you saw it before, the number of lots becoming available quicker. And we had to keep up and we had to learn on the run as we started rolling out these new deeds. Now, we'd done a bunch of prep work, but it was pretty quick. And so we've worked really hard to apply those deeds consistently. But what we have found in that first 12 to 18 months was that council was often placed in an intermediary role in between developers who might not have seen eye to eye on matters that would be better dealt with as a negotiation between developers. So that led to a lot of time and legal costs for us, along with the considerable burden of responding to many questions on the deeds and how they should be applied. So what that taught us over the first 12 to 18 months was that if that continued, that's not going to work for us as an organisation for 10 to 15 years. We need to make sure we start to ratchet back the impact on our resources and our time and our legal fees to ensure that this private development is sustainable for us in terms of our business. And so you may recall some of the things we've started to do, and we're in the process of doing other things. So the learning I've just outlined and the appointment of a new independent case manager under the road deed created an appropriate time for us to reset. And so the council's already endorsed earlier this year the developer engagement statement of ethics policy in an updated form. So strengthen that in a number of areas relevant to the residential development sector. Sort of related to that, we've also been in discussion with the UDIA, which is the Urban Development Institute of Australia, about other things we can do in that space to make sure everyone's moving forward how they should. We've also spent a bit of time having a good look at the road deed and the spectrum of interpretation about the independent case manager and how much administration supporting that ICM council does versus how much the ICM themselves does. And we've got a clear understanding now of that there's a bit of a spectrum, and we set it up working at one end of that spectrum, and we've briefed the new ICM in such a way to shift it to the other end of that spectrum. So that means that there'll be, the intent is more of the administrative support being done by the ICM rather than council staff supporting the ICM. So at all times previously, the ICM maintained their independence, but we would help him understand what needed to be done at what stages. And so now we're sort of setting up the new ICM in a way that they can be much more proactive about that. So that's been a really good learning for us, and it's not about previous ICMs doing anything that they shouldn't have. It was just the interpretation of the deed that we set up. So that's a big change for us, and we're already seeing in the appointment of John Stimson and briefing him up in a different way that he's approaching that role very differently, and I think that'll work out quite well for not just council's business efficiency, but also I think it will lead to better outcomes for the developers as well. So, but time will prove that. Later tonight, we'll be talking to you about the stormwater deed and a bunch of water stuff, and that proposes to include an ICM style role to help bring some of the benefits that that role can bring. And obviously taking the learnings that I just talked about before. And the social infrastructure deed, we're also exploring the opportunities there with a view to maybe creating a situation where there's a kind of one-stop shop for developers around those three aspects of infrastructure, but there's a bit more work to do around that social deed side of things. And there may be other things that we find that further brings the sustainability for our business back to where we think it should be. Not cooperating. Stace, can you hit down, please? Thank you very much. So under the road infrastructure deed over the last 12 months, Lisa's mentioned a few of these. We had a replacement of component process, so that was that roundabout process we went through. There was the complaint consideration against the ICM, which was processed in accordance with the road deed. We considered a bank guarantee in partnership with the landholders as a different way of interpreting the deed. That wasn't ultimately found to be something we could do at the time, but it's sitting there as something that could be explored in more detail later, with subject to other landholder support for a variation. Recognition of the in-kind delivery of a component. So St Eve's built a big intersection, and I mentioned that out on site earlier, an intersection in the realm of $2 million worth, and that was delivered by St Eve's as an in-kind under the road deed. We've seen some sale of land, excuse me, not COVID. And so we've worked with those landholders to transfer their obligations under the deeds to the new owners. And there'll be one coming up very soon in Villawood and Vergara as well. And as I mentioned before, we had a change of ICM. What worked? Too much. Now it won't work at all. Oh, Stacey, cue that, thank you. And the social infrastructure deed, that list up there are the things in the social deed which are funded via that deed. So the developers either deliver these items in kind or they pay money into a fund on a per lot or per hectare basis. And so if we just skip to the next item, please, Stacey, thank you. So you may recall that Council has executed an in-kind agreement under the social infrastructure deed with the Land Vision Group for them to deliver those things on that slide. And I think we'll just skip forward, Stacey, to the picture, which probably tells a better story about those things, which is an oval, multi-use courts, cricket nets, some car parks, and some sort of tiered edge to the oval. And so if we just skip to the next slide, Stacey, you'll see that in the context of Land Vision Group's vision for the site ultimately. So some of this stuff may not be delivered exactly how it's pictured, but that's what Land Vision Group ultimately see that oval reserve doing, sitting next to the Trinity College School. So you can see the black line down the middle of that block there on the eastern side, or the right-hand side of that black line is land that Trinity College will own, and on the western or left-hand side is the public reserve. So if you skip to the next slide. So to enable that arrangement, Council went out to consultation on a community land management plan and a licence agreement for the St Eve's main reserve. So the CLMP ensures open space status of the land is preserved for use by the broader community, while the licence agreement gives Trinity College the surety that they'll have access to that land at appropriate times for usage by the school. And at the same time, the broader community being equally assured that they have unrestricted use as a recreation space outside of the school hours or activities. So there was a lot of work that has gone into that, and we're very, very close to that licence agreement being executed with Trinity College. It may be this week. We had hoped to bring it tonight to get those signatures on, but not quite there.
Simon, is there a skate park going in somewhere or not?
A skate park, not at this stage that I'm aware of, but I know Joe Pedisano from St Eve's and Land Vision Group is really keen to do some amazing things on his reserve, and he's certainly he's been talking about a large adventure playground and the like, and I have no idea, but he may propose other things. And we've got the other developers in other parts of and so early days with chats there.
Which
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when they put in an application they have to put an application to council to be able to put the things in that reserve, like a skate park and all that. They don't have to do any of that. She's saying no.
So under the social infrastructure deed, if they want to realise credit under the deed or have it recognised as in kind, then they need to negotiate with council to do that. It's basically a first come, first serve thing. So if you want some stuff off the list, you come and negotiate. Since St Eve's have done that, there's a few things left. The big one is what I'm about to talk about next. But in terms of other stuff that gets proposed, I assume that's planning assessment. Yeah. Okay. So it'll still get assessed, but it'll be under the planning provisions rather than the social deed. Lisa's nodding, so I'm on the right track. The other item of social infrastructure that is quite major is a shared use path between Roseworthy and Gawler. So we've done the very first step of that, which is just survey the rail corridor in partnership with One Rail Australia, who holds the lease over that land. So that's a pretty big bit of survey job in itself, and ultimately that'll be funds we can recover via the social deed fund as funds start to come in. So at the moment, St Eves won't be paying into that fund because they've struck an in-kind agreement with us to deliver an oval. So they don't need to pay any money in because they're going to deliver works up to the right amount. The next round of developers, unless they strike a similar agreement, they will start paying money into the fund, and that's when we can start recovering money out of the social fund if appropriate.
Could I just ask another question? So the ownership of the railway line has changed, has it?
No, it's still owned by the state government, but the leaseholders, their name changed from Genesee Wyoming Australia to One Rail Australia.
So Genesee Wyoming have sold it to?
I think there was a global takeover of Genesee Wyoming. They had a name change or something.
Okay.
I think we're still dealing with the same contact person who we have a good relationship with.
Yep.
Thanks, Stacey. We've also opened a dialogue with the Department of Infrastructure and Transport about public transport. Wanted to get in really early, and they seem to really appreciate that. It seemed like it was quite an unusual thing for a group of council collaborating with the developers to be thinking about this at a really proactive way. They basically said, great to get it on their radar. Likely timing for increasing extent and frequency of services will be tied to how fast the allotments are built out, how fast the activity centre is built, and how fast Trinity College is built, because as you can imagine, that's going to drive who uses it. So the dialogue is opened, which is great. That's what we set out to do for now, and we've now got a much better understanding of the timelines for advocacy that will be required to realise uplift in services at an appropriate time. So in terms of regional sports, in a similar sort of way, we wanted to proactively engage some of the key sports associations. We made a start with SACA, SANFL and Football SA, noting that there are others out there that we will ultimately need to engage. Those three had a really consistent message back to us, which was get yourself sorted with a contemporary sport, rec and open space strategy, because that's going to be really important to help secure any co-funding with those associations later. So we're looking at the whole precinct, including the University of Adelaide Roseworthy campus, which has lots of facilities, playing fields and the like already. So really happy that a budget was approved by council for 2021-22, which included some money to do that strategy. So we'll be getting cracking on that very soon. Thanks, Stace. This one justified the reason I read the local newspapers once a week, because the only reason we saw this one come up is because it appeared in the Bunyip newspaper. The advent of the Riverbanks College over at Angle Vale resulted in a bunch of zone changes being required for schools in the precinct in the area. And so we contacted the Department of Education, who had initially proposed a boundary that chopped the Roseworthy Township expansion in half. Inadvertently, they weren't aware of the extent of RTE. And so we advocated for at least Roseworthy existing and its township expansion ending up with the same secondary public school zone. And my understanding is most Roseworthy secondary school kids go to Kapunda High School at the moment. And so that's essentially what we've enabled for the whole of Roseworthy going forward. And I think there's a few more slides. Stacey, I think I've got a water one next. Thank you. So our next item on the agenda is where we'll deal with the water matter in confidence in more detail, but just in the public forum, there's a photo there of some happy news the Mayor received the other week, that there's some funny looking guys next to him, who one in particular was sledged a lot by the journalists, so well done for handling that. yeah, so it was great to secure 4.5 mil through the National Water Grid Authority. So we'll talk about that in more detail later. In the meantime, basically the time is now on the stormwater deed. St Ives has got to the point where they need to be able to demonstrate they've got an agreement to connect to a scheme to take their volume of stormwater away to meet the stormwater deed. And so the timing could not be better in terms of securing that grant. And look forward to talking about the details of that a little bit later. In the meantime, St Ives have been really good in working under a good faith interim arrangement around installing suitable, we'll call it water on infrastructure, so to deliver irrigation to public open space, so that they install it now in good faith so that no roads have to get dug up later when we plug in a scheme. So that's been great. And we've done a bunch of work, which we'll talk about in more detail later, about getting a concept design ready that can work for everyone. And as we'll talk about, there's multiple stakeholders in terms of working for everyone. And we'll talk about later the deed of variation to the stormwater deed, Bunyip water terms and prudential issues paper. So subject to council consent, we hope that we'll be in a position in September to go back to landholders, but we'll see how we go later on. Finally, I think this is the last slide or second to last. Just wanted to touch on the fact it's been wet, very wet in June and July. And I think the report we provided goes into a little bit of detail about how wet. And what it's seen is the stormwater flows in the area behaving as we'd expect for conditions like this, but because there's a development going on, we understand that things are changing on the ground, and there's and also the fact that sometimes things don't quite go as you plan for a construction site, and so we have seen that with the basin at St Ives having a breach over a weekend recently, and so our development engineer is working with the developers to rectify that as soon as possible. So conditions have been challenging for getting any vehicles around muddy areas. But our development engineer is making good progress there. Council's also looking more broadly across our across basins that we manage to make sure they are behaving as they should. And if we need to make changes to manage the situation, that's what we are doing. But I will make the comment that the Roseworthy water scheme that we'll talk about later, together with developer implemented works as they build out their whole development and delivery of their deed obligations under the 3 deeds, because all 3 are relevant to stormwater, that will lead to a situation where there's formalised stormwater management across Roseworthy, thereby minimising nuisance flooding. But we have to get there first. And so there's this messy period of construction where things aren't always going to be perfect, but we do need to keep working on those to minimise disruption and nuisance.
Simon, so the Roseworthy aquifer, is that working?
Roseworthy aquifer?
Yeah, by the silos. It's at the top, where the water runs through the town.
Okay. So the stormwater running through the Batera site
into an aquifer, which is alongside of the dam. Is that working still? Are we going to use that?
I'll have to take that on notice. What we are looking at is will be discussed a bit later in terms of capturing the stormwater originating from that Batera site and bringing it into the Roseworthy water scheme. So if you don't mind,
bear that in mind.
Yeah, for sure. And we can discuss that later as well. Just quickly on utility infrastructure, we've also established really good relationships proactively with all the relevant utilities. They have also unbidden gone to various meetings with industry and said how positive the proactive approach for Roseworthy Township expansion has been. So it's nice to get pumped up a bit without having to pay for it. So, but that practically is about trying to put us in a position where if something crops up, we're able to deal with it really quickly. And so we had an example last week around a bit of stormwater ponding on the eastern side of Horrocks Highway, possibly related to some gas main works. And so we're able to really quickly get onto the gas main guys and start to get that sorted to minimise disruption. So yeah, we're really happy about how that's going. And we met with SA Water last week, or was it earlier this week, about where they're at with their augmentation of sewer and potable water to get an understanding of when the existing Roseworthy Township will likely be connected to the new sewer scheme, which has a really really important for us in terms of that land where the Swims Lagoon is at the moment at Roseworthy. I think that's the end of my presentation. Yes, so I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Simon. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Simon?
I got a few questions. So one question in the presentation that Lisa done, there's a mention of some trees on Kangaroo Flat Road, and as I understand, they're like old growth trees. They've been there for probably 200 years, so well before white settlement. I just wonder what the fate of those trees are, if they're going to be saved.
So the concept plan for the Roseworthy Township expansion did not show the road going straight down that road reserve. When we got to the Quindu Hickenbotham development proposing their alignment, we started to discuss with them about how could we retain these trees. The Native Vegetation Act can enable clearance of trees through payment of offsets, as you're probably aware. However, we are working with Hickenbotham and Villawood to try and find a way to meet their requirements, as well as Department of Infrastructure and Transport's requirements around the east-west freight route that needs to go through there, at least in terms of a road reserve allowance. And retain as much of those old growth native vegetation, local provenance trees as possible. So we're at a really key stage because I think Villawood and Hickenbotham just very recently started their just one-on-one negotiations about that. And as you can imagine, that's probably the most important discussion because they're going to have to talk about, okay, if a road is going to go a bit to the south or to the north, which side, how does it work? What does one get? What does the other get? So we've been as proactive as we can to try and facilitate an outcome that everyone wins from. So we haven't landed it yet, but we're working very hard on it.
And what is your feeling? You think that's going to, I mean, they're going to be sustained?
I remain very optimistic.
Good.
Councillor Simon?
How do we start? Since there was again in the presentation is a mention of a potential shared use path between Gawler and Roseworthy. So my passion for trains, obviously, is that the default or for the option that's ever going to be trains there, or is that's just in that reserve and trains could theoretically still run?
The latter.
The latter.
There might be some pinch points that we'll need to think about carefully, but it's quite a wide rail reserve for most of it. So we think there's probably some opportunities for some win-win situations in terms of full drives using that space when they perhaps shouldn't. And so it's very early days though with discussions with One Rail. It's basically one step at a time. Start with survey because that's the basis for any subsequent discussion.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor Bill?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. The Kangaroo Flat Road, will that be a Dip 2 road or will that be a developer-funded road?
It's developer funded through the road deed. I think it's a council road now, isn't it? If it ever became an east-west freight route, I think it would become it.
In terms of DIT roads, there's a formal process to go through. Given that Gummersall Road took some 12 or 13 years to hand over, I'm not tipping that Kangaroo Flat Roads would be a quick one.
Thank you, Richard.
I suppose my question is if the road is going to be bitumised, which it needs to be if it's an access point, I mean, you're not going to make it a dip T size road when you first put it up, are you?
Okay, yes, I understand what you're asking. So the road reserve is being designed to be able to accommodate a future east-west freight route, but the road carriageway itself is being designed to suit Roseworthy Township expansion as it is foreshadowed now. So it'll have the space to expand later if they ever went ahead with that east-west freight route.
Thanks, Simon. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Simon?
In your report, it says that council has opened a dialogue with DEET about public transport infrastructure, or just public transport. So is rail in that discussion as well, or are we just talking buses and stuff like that?
Buses were the main thrust of the discussion. There was some reference to the previous larger scale Roseworthy Garden initial proposal that had rail in the mix, but recognition that the what has been approved through the development plan is a different proposition and did not include rail at this point.
So there's no chance, or chance of quite low to see rail going any further than Gawler?
We didn't get the sense there was any change in position on that.
Thanks, Simon.
One more, oh, actually two more if I can. But about the public schools, you were saying that the whole of Roseworthy is in its own zone, and as we heard as well, they're all going to go to Kapunda. So how's that going to work out? Kapunda is obviously sort of on capacity pretty much right now. So if you've got 10,000 people with their kids want to go there, so that's going to be an issue. So what's the planning in that? Do we know anything about that?
I can only say how happy the principal was at Kapunda, but I can't answer that. I would have to take that on notice and seek a response from Kapunda High School. I'm happy to do that.
And one more thing, just somebody asked me actually today, do we know, does anybody know if and what sort of supermarket's going to go into Roseworthy? Which brand, or if there's a supermarket at all?
I know, but I'm not sure it's my right to share that. So I can ask if the developer in question is happy to give you that information. I think it's reasonably widely known.
I mean, that's what I'm asking. I mean, I've heard all these rumors about people asking me, and I'm like, I don't actually know. I know the rumors, but.
Going to Eves and look at the title, it might in the public.
Through the chair,
Further questions, councillors?
through the chair, I'm on water again, sorry. Where does the water on the Villawood one where the signs are now at the bottom of the Roseworthy subdivision, where does that water, where will the water go from that? Will that end up running down the railway line, or where will it go? Because you must have there's not a natural water course, is there?
In this confidential item, we'll be talking about the design for the scheme, so that might be a good place to
that's
talk
good
about that.
Councillors, that's it? Well, I'd like to certainly thank you, Simon and Lisa. It was an excellent report, and it's been an exciting journey. It's been 12 years, pretty much. But we're getting to the pointy end now, and it's to see those first homes go up is absolutely exciting for everybody, I think, concerned. And it's certainly our future as a region now with this, and it's being ably managed, obviously. I enjoyed reading the report and your explanation of the report that we received tonight went further than that, and so did your presentation. I'm just wondering if we could get an email copy of the presentation sent to the elected members. I mean, the report was pretty much covered what you said, but there was extras in that, and I think everyone would probably benefit from a copy of that. But again, thank you so much for the efforts you're putting into this and the professionalism of how it's being managed. I think it's a great credit to our council and to the planning department. Councillors, we can now move on. We move into our confidential section. So we'll need someone